It is a chillingly familiar story, a narrative that echoes in boardrooms, political chambers, and even quiet suburban homes. You placed your complete and unwavering trust in someone, believing the bond you shared was a fortress against the cruelties of the world. They were more than a colleague or an acquaintance, they were a friend. They were there to celebrate your victories, offering resounding applause and heartfelt congratulations. They stood beside you during struggles, their voice a constant refrain of encouragement, whispering the powerful words, "We are in this together." You believed them, not just with your mind but with your heart, assuming that this shared history was an unbreakable pact of loyalty and mutual support. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the atmosphere begins to shift, a subtle change in tone, a momentary hesitation where there was once enthusiasm or a glance that lingers a second too long. Soon, the subtle signs become overt actions that you can no longer ignore or explain away. In important meetings, they begin to interrupt you, cutting off your sentences mid-thought to steer the conversation in a different direction. Your most innovative ideas, once shared in confidence, are suddenly presented as their own, leaving you silenced and invisible. Whispers follow you down the hallway, and you learn through the grapevine that they have been holding closed-door conversations, painting a narrative that conveniently excludes your contributions and undermines your standing. The shock of this realization is often the most debilitating part of the experience, a cold wave of disbelief that washes over you. The betrayal is a wound that cuts deeper, because it was inflicted by a hand you never thought would hold a weapon against you. You simply did not see it coming, blinded by the comfortable illusion of friendship and the warmth of shared memories. The very foundation of your professional or personal relationship, which you thought was built on solid ground, reveals itself to be nothing more than shifting sand. This feeling of being blindsided is a universal pain, a testament to how deeply we invest our faith in those we call our friends. Now, consider the inverse of this painful scenario, a situation that feels counterintuitive and almost paradoxical. Think of that rival, the one you always kept at a distance, the individual whose brutal honesty often felt like a personal attack. They never pretended to be your ally. Their position was always clear, their intentions transparent, even if adversarial. Yet when a crisis hits, when a project demands unwavering competence and reliability, it is this very person who steps up to the plate. They arrive on time, deliver on their promises, and operate without the emotional baggage, hidden agendas, or delicate ego that so often complicates relationships with those closer to us. It feels backward, but it is a potent reality. This perplexing dynamic where allies become saboteurs and adversaries become assets is not a random occurrence or a stroke of bad luck. It is a predictable pattern of human behavior, especially within arenas where power, influence, and status are the currencies of exchange. The core of the issue lies in the dangerous intersection of emotion and ambition. In the complex game of power, the very people who feel they have an inherent right to your loyalty, those who believe they are owed something by virtue of your shared past, are often the ones most psychologically primed to betray that sacred trust. Their sense of entitlement can curdle into a potent poison, transforming affection into a simmering and destructive resentment. This is the fundamental principle at the heart of one of the most provocative and misunderstood maxims from Robert Greene's seminal work, The 48 Laws of Power. We are dissecting Law 2, Never Put Too Much Trust in Friends, Learn How to Use Enemies. This law does not advocate for a life of paranoid isolation or cynical manipulation. Instead, it serves as a stark and pragmatic warning against the naive assumption that friendship automatically equates to unwavering loyalty. It challenges us to look beyond the surface of our relationships and to understand the subtle, often unconscious motivations that drive human action when stakes are high. The law compels us to reevaluate our traditional definitions of trust and allegiance. It suggests that basing critical decisions on emotional bonds and shared history is a strategic vulnerability. A friend, feeling overshadowed by your success, can easily become envious. Their gratitude for past favors can morph into a sense of being left behind, creating an emotional debt they feel you can never truly repay. This perceived slight, whether real or imagined, can become the justification for small acts of sabotage that eventually escalate into full-blown betrayal. They may not see themselves as malicious, but rather as victims evening the score. In contrast, an enemy or a rival operates from a completely different psychological standpoint. They have no preconceived expectations of your generosity or support. They stand outside your inner circle, and therefore any opportunity you extend to them is not seen as an obligation, but as a rare and valuable chance. An enemy given a path to redemption or a seat at the table has something to prove, not just to you, but to themselves. Their loyalty is not rooted in the shifting sands of emotion, but in the solid ground of mutual interest, and the clear-eyed desire to demonstrate their worth, making them a surprisingly reliable and motivated ally. On the surface, the idea of placing your trust in a friend feels like the most logical and secure course of action. It is an instinct rooted deep in our social DNA. These are the people who have witnessed your journey, who understand your quirks, and who have offered a shoulder to lean on during difficult times. Their presence is comforting, their support feels genuine, and the shared history creates a powerful illusion of safety. You believe they have your best interests at heart because for so long, they have. But within the cold, calculating ecosystem of power, this very sense of safety can become a devastatingly effective trap, luring you into a state of complacency just when you need to be most vigilant. The danger lies in the subtle psychological shifts that occur when the dynamics of a relationship change, particularly when one person begins to ascend the ladder of success more rapidly than the other. When a friend sees you rise, achieving the recognition or status they may secretly covet for themselves, something quiet and often unconscious begins to change within them. They will continue to smile, to offer congratulations, and to play the part of the supportive confidant, but beneath this placid exterior, a current of comparison begins to flow. They start to measure your success against their own perceived stagnation, and the seeds of envy are sown in the fertile ground of their own insecurities. This internal comparison inevitably leads to a corrosive line of questioning. They might start to wonder, why them and not me? We started at the same place. Or they might feel a sense of entitlement, thinking, don't they owe me something for all the times I helped them? For all the sacrifices I made? This imagined debt, this unspoken ledger of favors given and expected in return, begins to fester like an untreated wound. What was once genuine gratitude for your friendship slowly transforms into a quiet, simmering resentment. They feel that your success is somehow a personal slight, a betrayal of an unwritten rule that you were supposed to rise together, equally. This festering resentment rarely manifests as an open and honest confrontation. Instead, it expresses itself through more insidious and damaging behaviors. It is the art of subtle sabotage. Suddenly, crucial deadlines are narrowly missed with plausible but flimsy excuses. Passive-aggressive comments and backhanded compliments become a regular feature of your interactions, designed to chip away at your confidence. Vital information is conveniently withheld, or you are excluded from key conversations under the guise of an oversight. Emotionally, friendship operates on an assumption of equality, but the architecture of power is inherently hierarchical. When that equilibrium is disrupted, the friend who feels left behind may act not to help you, but to pull you back down to their level. Now let's look at the other side of this law, the power of turning enemies into allies. Using a former enemy can be risky, but it's often more effective than relying on friends. Enemies know where they stand. There's no confusion, no hidden expectations. When you offer them a chance, they work hard to prove themselves, often harder than a friend would. Their loyalty is earned, not assumed. It's based on mutual interest, not sentiment. That's why a former rival can become your most reliable ally, motivated, grateful, and invested in your success. Ultimately, Law 2 is not a cynical directive to abandon all friendships or to live in a state of perpetual suspicion. It would be a lonely and honestly pretty miserable existence to cut off every person with whom you share a genuine connection. Rather, the law serves as a crucial lesson in discernment and emotional intelligence. It urges you to separate the realms of personal affection from the strategic necessities of power. The core message is a cautionary one. You must never blindly assume that the warmth of friendship automatically translates into the unwavering steel of loyalty, especially when ambitions and fortunes are on the line. Friendship and loyalty are not synonymous. The law challenges us to recalibrate how we measure trust. Instead of basing it on shared history or fond memories, we must learn to evaluate it based on actions, shared interests, and proven competence. Do not confuse the length of a relationship with the depth of its allegiance. A person who has been around for years is not necessarily more trustworthy than a newcomer who consistently demonstrates their value. It is essential to be vigilant and to recognize the subtle red flags that people often display. Ignoring passive aggression, growing envy, or a sense of entitlement in a friend because they've always been around is a strategic blunder that can leave you exposed and vulnerable to betrayal. In the high-stakes arena of power, your most intelligent and sustainable move is to build your alliances with individuals who have tangible skin in the game. Seek out those whose success is directly tied to your own, creating a relationship of mutual dependence and shared destiny. These are the allies who will fight for your cause because it is also their cause. Their motivation is not rooted in a nostalgic sense of obligation or a desire for emotional comfort, but in the clear, unambiguous pursuit of a common goal. This creates a much stronger and more resilient bond than one based on the ephemeral foundation of shared memories alone. Therefore, the application of this law requires a delicate balance. Cherish your friends for the joy, comfort, and support they bring to your personal life. However, when it comes to matters of professional advancement, strategic partnerships, and positions of power, you must employ a different, more objective set of criteria. Do not hire, promote, or empower friends out of sentimentality. Instead, choose the most competent, deserving, and reliable person for the role, regardless of your personal history with them. By doing so, you are not being cold or ruthless. You are being wise, ensuring that your endeavors are built on a foundation of merit and mutual interest, not on the fragile and unpredictable whims of emotion. To truly grasp the devastating consequences of misplaced trust, we must travel back in time to the opulent yet treacherous world of 9th century Byzantium. The Byzantine Empire, the glittering successor to Rome, was a realm of immense wealth, sophisticated culture, and constant political intrigue. At its helm sat the young Emperor Michael III. Having ascended to the throne at a tender age, Michael was impressionable and more interested in the pleasures of the court than the burdensome duties of governance. He was surrounded by seasoned politicians, cunning courtiers, and ambitious military leaders, all of whom saw his naivete as an opportunity. In this viper's nest of power, a wise ruler would have sought counsel from experienced and proven advisors, but Michael chose a different path. He chose to elevate a man not for his political acumen or noble birth, but for his personal connection to the emperor. This man was Basilius the Macedonian, a figure of humble origins. Basilius was a former stable boy, a man of immense physical strength and charisma, who had first caught the emperor's eye through a display of raw power in a wrestling match. Later he solidified his place in Michael's favor by an act of heroism, saving the emperor's life from a runaway horse. For Michael, this was not just a brave deed, it was the ultimate proof of loyalty. He saw in Basilius not a subject but a soulmate, a true and devoted friend in a court filled with sycophants. Blinded by gratitude and affection, Michael began to shower Basilius with unimaginable rewards, pulling him from the obscurity of the stables and placing him at the heart of the imperial court. He provided Basilius with a first-class education, teaching him the ways of the nobility and grooming him for a life of influence. He bestowed upon him immense wealth, lavish estates, and prestigious titles, transforming the poor stable boy into one of the most powerful men in the empire. The bond seemed to deepen with every gift. Michael trusted Basilius so completely that he even gave him his own beloved mistress, Eudokia Ingarina, to marry, a gesture of profound and almost reckless intimacy. In Michael's mind, he was forging an unbreakable alliance. He was creating the perfect ally, a man who owed him everything, his education, his status, his family, his very life. He believed that this foundation of overwhelming gratitude would guarantee Basilius's unwavering loyalty forever. What could be a more secure bond than one built on a life debt? From an emotional standpoint, it seemed like a flawless strategy. He had bypassed the scheming nobles and instead created his own man, a friend who would be his ultimate ride-or-die companion in the perilous game of power. Or so it seemed. Michael had failed to understand a critical aspect of human nature. When you give someone everything, they can easily forget it was a gift and begin to see it as their due. As Basilius grew accustomed to his new life of privilege and power, the gratitude that had once defined him began to curdle into something far more dangerous: ambition. The world of the imperial court, with its endless opportunities for advancement, had awakened a hunger within him that no amount of wealth or status could satisfy. He was no longer the humble stable boy, content to serve his benefactor. He was now a major player in the Byzantine power structure, and from his new vantage point, he could see the ultimate prize glittering just within reach, the imperial throne itself. His friendship with Michael was no longer a source of security, but a stepping stone toward his own ascent. His first strategic move was to eliminate any potential rivals who stood between him and the emperor's ear. The most significant obstacle was Bardas, Michael's uncle, and the de facto ruler of the empire. Bardas was an experienced and capable statesman who held the official title of Caesar. He was the true power behind the throne, managing the affairs of the state while Michael indulged in his whims. Basilius knew that as long as Bardas was in control, his own influence would be limited. And so, he began to systematically poison Michael's mind against his own uncle, a man who had loyally served the empire for years. With calculated precision, Basilius planted seeds of doubt and paranoia. He would whisper to the emperor in moments of confidence, twisting Bardas's prudent actions into evidence of treachery. He framed his uncle's political maneuvering as a direct plot to usurp the throne, suggesting that Bardas saw Michael as nothing more than an incompetent puppet. He played on Michael's deepest insecurities, his fear of being seen as a weak and ineffectual ruler. The constant venomous whispers worked their magic. The young emperor, who valued the passionate loyalty of his friend over the steady competence of his family, began to see his wise uncle as a mortal enemy. Convinced by Basilius that his own life and throne were in jeopardy, Michael made a fateful decision. He listened to his friend. During a military expedition with Basilius at his side, the emperor sanctioned the assassination of his own uncle. Bardas was brutally murdered, cut down by agents loyal to Basilius right before the emperor's eyes. The path was now clear. With his most formidable rival eliminated, Basilius was promptly elevated to the now vacant position of Caesar. He had successfully manipulated the emperor's trust to remove the one man who could have stopped him. Michael, believing he had just solidified his power, had in reality just signed his own death warrant. With Bardas out of the way and the title of Caesar secured, the transformation of Basilius was complete. The mask of the devoted friend fell away, revealing the cold, hard face of a ruthless usurper. The dynamic between him and Michael shifted almost overnight. Basilius, now co-ruler in all but name, began to operate with an arrogance and independence that shocked the emperor. He no longer sought Michael's approval or even feigned subservience. He issued commands, made political appointments, and managed the treasury as if it were his own, often without consulting the man who had given him everything. The power he had been gifted was now being wielded against his benefactor. The breaking point came during a mundane, almost trivial dispute over money. Michael, having spent lavishly as usual, found himself short of funds and asked Basilius to repay a significant sum that he had previously borrowed. It was a reasonable request between supposed friends, a simple matter of returning a loan. But Basilius's reaction was one of open contempt. Instead of agreeing or even offering an excuse, he simply refused. According to historical accounts, he met the emperor's request with a cold smirk, his eyes devoid of the warmth and gratitude that had once defined their relationship. His arrogance was a slap in the face, a clear signal that he no longer considered himself Michael's subordinate. In that chilling moment of refusal, the scales finally fell from Michael's eyes. The terrible reality of his situation crashed down upon him with the force of a physical blow. He stared at the man before him, the man he had plucked from poverty, educated and elevated to the second highest position in the empire, and he did not see a friend. He saw a stranger, a cold and calculating monster of his own creation. He realized with a dawning horror that his generosity had not fostered loyalty, it had only fed an insatiable ambition. He had not created a steadfast ally, he had armed and empowered a deadly threat who now stood poised to destroy him. The emperor had made the classic mistake outlined in Law 2. He had placed his trust in the emotional bond of friendship, assuming that gratitude would be a permanent shield. He failed to see that by giving Basilius so much power without any checks or balances, he had upset the natural equilibrium. Basilius no longer needed Michael's friendship. He had what he wanted, and the emperor was now merely an obstacle in his path to absolute rule. The realization came far too late. The stable boy had become a king in his own mind, and there was no room in the empire for two rulers. The final bloody act of this tragedy was now inevitable. The end for Michael III came as it often did for Byzantine emperors who had lost control, swiftly and brutally. The final act was set in motion during a night of heavy drinking, one of the many debauched evenings that the emperor was famous for. Michael, perhaps seeking to drown his fears and sorrows, retired to his chambers in a drunken stupor, vulnerable and unprotected. He had become isolated, having eliminated his most capable protector, Bardas, and alienated other loyal factions at the behest of Basilius. He was a king without allies, a man surrounded by enemies, the most dangerous of whom he still called his friend and co-ruler. That night, Basilius, now confident in his power and support within the military, decided the time was right to seize the throne for himself. He led a small group of armed co-conspirators who crept through the palace corridors and stormed the emperor's private apartment. Michael, roused from his drunken sleep, was met not with the familiar face of his companion, but with the cold steel of assassins' swords. He was defenseless. The man who had once saved his life from a charging horse now stood by and watched as his soldiers mercilessly cut the emperor down. Michael III was assassinated in his own bed, his reign brought to a bloody and ignominious end by the very hand he had raised from obscurity. But Basilius's betrayal did not end with the murder. To solidify his claim and send a terrifying message to any remaining loyalists, he needed to make a public and gruesome spectacle of his victory. He ordered his men to sever Michael's head from his body. The following day, as Basilius I was proclaimed the new sole emperor of the Byzantine Empire, he paraded through the streets of Constantinople. To the horror of the assembled crowds, he displayed the severed head of his former friend and benefactor on the end of a pike, a ghastly trophy of his ultimate betrayal. The stable boy had not just taken the throne, he had grotesquely erased the memory of the man who had placed him upon it. The brutal story of Michael and Basilius serves as one of history's most stark and violent warnings against the dangers of mixing friendship with power. Not all betrayals are this gory or dramatic, but the underlying lesson is just as brutal. Loyalty that is built on a foundation of gratitude is fragile and unreliable. It can easily be eroded by envy, entitlement, and ambition. Once the debt is mentally repaid or forgotten, the bond dissolves. In contrast, loyalty that is built on a rational balance of power and mutual self-interest is far more durable. Michael III did not lose his empire to an enemy. He lost it to the friend he trusted above all others, proving the timeless and tragic wisdom of law too. Fast forward a century from the bloody courts of Byzantium to the tumultuous landscape of 10th century China. This era, known as the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms period, was defined by chaos, fragmentation, and relentless warfare. Dynasties rose and fell with breathtaking speed, often ending in violent coups led by powerful generals. In the year 960, another general, Zhao Guangyin, seized power in a coup, deposing a child emperor and declaring himself Emperor Taizu of the new Sung dynasty. He knew his position was precarious. He had taken the throne by force, and the very generals who had helped him rise were ambitious, powerful men who could just as easily overthrow him for their own gain. History had taught him what happens to new emperors: they get killed by jealous generals. Emperor Sung, a brilliant strategist not only on the battlefield but also in the court, understood the deep-seated paranoia and ambition that fueled the cycle of betrayal. He recognized that simply demanding loyalty from his commanders, men who were essentially his peers and rivals, was a fool's errand. They were his friends in the military sense, comrades in arms who had fought alongside him. Yet he knew that this shared history was a liability, not an asset. Each one of them likely believed they were just as deserving of the dragon throne as he was. A lesser ruler might have chosen a path of ruthless purges, assassinating his potential rivals one by one to secure his power through fear. But Emperor Sung chose a different, far more masterful approach. Instead of plotting in the shadows, he brought the potential problem into the light. He invited all of his most powerful generals to a magnificent feast. The atmosphere was undoubtedly tense. The commanders arrived, likely expecting a trap, perhaps poisoned wine or assassins hiding behind screens, common tactics of the time. They were warriors, conditioned to expect treachery at every turn. But when they entered the banquet hall, they found no armed guards, no hidden traps, no hint of violence. Instead, they were greeted by their new emperor with warmth, respect, and an abundance of the finest food and wine. He treated them not as threats to be neutralized, but as honored colleagues whose service he deeply valued. As the feast progressed and the wine flowed, Emperor Sung steered the conversation not to matters of war or politics, but to the burdens of leadership. He spoke candidly of his own anxieties, of the sleepless nights, and the constant fear of making a fatal misstep. He lamented the heavy weight of the crown, and expressed a deep yearning for a simpler life of peace and prosperity. In a moment of masterful psychological maneuvering, he looked at his generals and said, "The life of a ruler is not one of joy but of constant worry. I do not believe any of you truly desire this burden for yourselves." He was not threatening them. He was offering them an honorable and appealing way out of the dangerous game they were all playing. With his generals listening intently, their initial suspicions eased by his disarming honesty, Emperor Sung laid his extraordinary proposal on the table. He did not ask them to swear new oaths of fealty or to pledge their lives to his cause. He knew such promises were worthless when ambition beckoned. Instead, he offered them an alternative to the endless cycle of violence and betrayal. He offered them a golden retirement. He proposed that they relinquish their military commands and their political power voluntarily. In exchange, he would grant them vast estates in the countryside, immense fortunes, and prestigious noble titles. They could live out their days in unparalleled luxury, secure their families for generations, and enjoy a life of peace, free from the game of power. This offer was a stroke of genius. It directly addressed the underlying desires of these men. While they craved power, they also feared the violent death that so often came with it. Sung was offering them all the rewards of a successful life, wealth, status, and security, without any of the risks. He was effectively buying their loyalty by making retirement a far more attractive prospect than rebellion. He concluded his speech by appealing to their sense of family and future, suggesting they forge an alliance through the marriage of their children, ensuring peace between them forever. The generals, stunned by this unprecedented offer, saw the wisdom in his words. One by one they agreed, tearfully thanking the emperor for his generosity and foresight. The next day they all resigned their posts, and the threat of a coup vanished overnight. Emperor Sung's sagacious handling of potential enemies did not stop with his own generals. As he set about unifying the fractured kingdoms of China, he faced numerous rival kings and warlords who fiercely resisted his rule. In the brutal logic of the era, a defeated enemy, especially a rival claimant to power, was typically executed without hesitation. To leave them alive was to invite future rebellion. Yet, when these rebel kings eventually surrendered to Sung's superior forces, he consistently defied convention. He showed them astounding mercy. There was no poison, no prison, no public execution. Instead, he treated his vanquished foes with honor and respect, a strategy that left them utterly disarmed. He would welcome these former kings into his own court, granting them noble titles, comfortable mansions near the palace, and generous pensions. He effectively turned his enemies into his neighbors. By keeping them close, he could monitor their activities, but the gesture was primarily one of trust. He gave them rank and status, making them part of his new imperial order, rather than disgraced outcasts. This shocking clemency had a profound psychological effect. These men, who had expected death, were instead given a life of dignity and comfort. They had been prepared to fight him to the bitter end, but they were entirely unprepared for his magnanimity. This unexpected kindness was a far more powerful tool for securing loyalty than any sword could ever be. The results of Emperor Sung's unorthodox strategy were nothing short of remarkable. What happened when he spared the lives of his most dangerous enemies and gave them positions of honor? They became his most steadfast and loyal allies. Why did this happen? It was the power of unexpected trust. These former kings and warlords were completely shocked by his mercy. In a world where the vanquished were always crushed, Sung chose to uplift them. This act of grace created a profound sense of psychological debt, a form of gratitude far stronger than that felt by any friend. They felt compelled to be loyal not out of fear, but out of genuine reverence for the man who had spared them. Their loyalty was not based on shared history or camaraderie. It was forged in the crucible of their defeat and rebirth. They had looked into the abyss, expecting to be pushed in, only to have the Emperor pull them back onto solid ground. This experience fundamentally reset their perception of him. He was no longer just a conqueror. He was a magnanimous and wise ruler worthy of their allegiance. They had everything to prove that his trust in them was not misplaced. Their own self-interest was now perfectly aligned with his. The Emperor's success guaranteed their continued safety and prosperity. To betray him would be to betray the very man who had granted them a second chance at life. By strategically trusting the right enemies, those who were defeated but still capable, Emperor Sung achieved what so many rulers before him had failed to do. He broke the cycle of rebellion and established a period of unprecedented stability and cultural flourishing. His decision to neutralize his generals with wealth instead of weapons, and to convert his rivals into courtiers instead of corpses, laid the foundation for a dynasty that would last for over 300 years. He understood that you do not truly defeat an enemy by crushing them, for that only breeds resentment and a desire for revenge in their descendants. You defeat them by making them invested in your own success. The story of Emperor Sung provides the perfect counterpoint to the tragedy of Michael III. While Michael's trust in a friend led to his bloody demise, Sung's calculated trust in his enemies secured his legacy for centuries. He masterfully demonstrated the second half of Law 2, Learn How to Use Enemies. He recognized that a reconciled foe, bound by a mixture of gratitude, self-interest and admiration, is often a more reliable and motivated supporter than a friend who may feel entitled and envious. Emperor Sung's reign is a timeless testament to the power of turning adversaries into assets, proving that sometimes the surest path to security is through an open hand, rather than a clenched fist. So why does this counterintuitive law hold so much psychological weight? Why do friends, who should be our staunchest supporters, sometimes become the architects of our downfall? The answer lies in the complex and often fragile nature of human emotion, specifically the concepts of expectation and entitlement. When you elevate a friend, you are not just giving them a job or an opportunity, you are altering the delicate social ecosystem you both inhabit. Friendships are typically built on a foundation of perceived equality and reciprocity. You share histories, vulnerabilities, and successes, but when you become their superior, this balance is irrevocably broken, and a dangerous psychological shift can begin to take place, often without either of you consciously realizing it. A friend, having been part of your journey from the beginning, often feels they have a stake in your success. They were there for the late-night brainstorming sessions, the moments of doubt, and the early struggles. Because of this shared history, they subconsciously expect to share in the rewards. They expect promotions, preferential treatment, and a seat at the table, not just based on merit but as a dividend on their emotional investment in you. When these unspoken expectations are not met, perhaps because another candidate was more qualified, a sense of injustice can take root. They don't see it as a fair business decision, they see it as a personal betrayal, a sign that you have forgotten where you came from and forgotten them. This feeling of being overlooked or undervalued quickly curdles into a far more potent emotion: envy. As they watch you continue to rise, their sense of entitlement transforms into quiet resentment. Every success you achieve serves as a painful reminder of their own perceived stagnation. This is not because they are inherently bad people, but because proximity makes comparison inevitable and potent. Psychologically, it's much harder to be envious of a distant stranger's success than it is of a close friend's. Their mind begins to justify feelings of bitterness. They start to rationalize small acts of sabotage, telling themselves they are simply leveling the playing field or taking what they are rightfully owed. This toxic cocktail of entitlement and envy makes a friend a uniquely dangerous liability in a position of power. Furthermore, with a friend, you are more likely to let your guard down. You will be less formal, more forgiving of their mistakes, and less willing to see the red flags of their growing resentment. You will dismiss passive-aggressive comments or missed deadlines as them just having a bad day, because your emotional connection blinds you to the strategic threat they are becoming. You are judging them based on your shared past, not their present actions. This emotional blind spot is precisely what makes betrayal by a friend so devastatingly effective. It doesn't come from an obvious enemy across the battlefield, but from someone you have willingly invited inside your fortress walls, granting them access to your greatest vulnerabilities. Now let's examine the psychological flip side. Why does a former enemy, when given an opportunity, often become a surprisingly loyal ally? The key to this phenomenon lies in the powerful neurological and emotional impact of surprise and shattered expectations. An enemy operates with a completely different set of assumptions. They expect nothing from you but opposition, suspicion, or indifference. They are mentally prepared for a fight, not for an act of grace. When you defy these expectations and instead offer them a position of trust, you create a moment of profound psychological dissonance. Their entire perception of you is instantly reset. This is where unexpected trust comes into play. Psychologists have found that an unanticipated act of kindness from a perceived adversary can be incredibly disarming. It shocks the brain out of its default state of hostility, forcing a reevaluation of the entire relationship. The enemy, prepared for a trap, is instead met with an open hand. This gesture is not seen as an entitlement but as a precious and unearned gift. This creates a powerful sense of gratitude and obligation, one that is often stronger than loyalty born from comfortable friendship. Furthermore, An enemy brought into your circle feels chosen not for comfort, but for their competence. You have likely been on the receiving end of their skills, so when you choose to utilize them, it's an acknowledgement of their strength. This appeals to a fundamental human need to be valued for one's abilities. They feel they have earned their spot through merit, even if that merit was first demonstrated in opposition. They are highly motivated to prove your decision was wise. They will work harder and show more dedication because their position feels conditional. This dynamic aligns their self-interest directly with yours. For a former enemy, their status and opportunity are contingent on your continued success. If you fall, they fall with you. This creates a pragmatic basis for loyalty independent of fickle emotions. Unlike a friend who might believe they could do your job better, a reconciled enemy knows their fortune is tied to yours. They are not just your ally, they have become a stakeholder in your enterprise. This calculated alignment of interest creates a bond more resilient than one based on shared memories alone. Ultimately, the psychology behind Law 2 is a lesson in separating emotional comfort from strategic effectiveness. Our natural human inclination is to surround ourselves with people we know, like, and feel comfortable with. This is the path of least resistance. Hiring or promoting a friend feels easy. The communication is already established, there is a shorthand, and it avoids the awkwardness of integrating a stranger or a former rival. However, this prioritization of comfort is a strategic trap. The goal in any power-sensitive environment, be it a business, a political campaign, or a creative project, is not to feel comfortable. The goal is to succeed, and success is built on a foundation of competence, not camaraderie. When you hire a friend, your judgment is almost always clouded. You are more likely to overlook their weaknesses and overstate their strengths because of your personal affection for them. When they underperform, providing critical feedback becomes a delicate and emotionally charged task. You risk damaging the friendship if you are too harsh, and you risk damaging the enterprise if you are too lenient. This emotional entanglement creates a constant low-level conflict of interest that compromises your ability to make clear, objective decisions. You end up managing a friendship instead of managing an employee, which is a recipe for mediocrity at best and disaster at worst. Conversely, when you engage with an enemy or a rival, the relationship is inherently clear and professional from the outset. There is no pretense of friendship to maintain. The expectations are unambiguous. They are there to perform a specific function to the best of their ability. Your judgment remains sharp and objective. You will evaluate their work based on its quality and results, not on your personal feelings. If they fail to meet the standard, the decision to remove them is a strategic one, not an emotional one. This clarity is a significant advantage. It ensures that every person on your team is there for one reason, because they are the best person for the job. This approach is not about being cold or inhumane, it is about being a smart and effective leader. True leadership involves making difficult decisions for the greater good of the organization. It means creating a meritocracy where performance is the only currency that matters. By prioritizing competence over comfort, you build a team that is resilient, highly motivated, and capable of achieving extraordinary things. You foster an environment where excellence is rewarded, and everyone understands the terms of their engagement. This is the core psychological wisdom of Law 2. Build your alliances on the solid rock of mutual interest and proven ability, not the shifting sands of personal sentiment. In today's workplace, don't hire friends, hire the most qualified. Use a rigorous, objective process for every candidate, friend or not. Prioritize the health of your organization over personal loyalty. Reward performance, not proximity. Avoid favoritism by using clear, measurable metrics. Share information transparently, don't create in-groups with work friends. True leadership means building a team where everyone succeeds by merit, not by friendship. Using enemies today means forming alliances with rivals when interests align. Analyze competitors for strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes collaboration beats rivalry. Test trust with small, low-risk projects before deeper partnerships. Emotional maturity is key. Your biggest obstacle could become your greatest ally. Make strategic choices, not emotional ones. Structure alliances with clear goals and agreements. Mastering this balance builds a resilient, high-performing network. Ignore this law, and betrayal will come from those closest to you, not your rivals. Friends inside your circle know your weaknesses and can undermine you quietly. Betrayal often comes disguised as loyalty, justified by self-serving narratives. The emotional fallout is devastating, questioning your judgment, replaying every moment, Trusting blindly makes you a target, not a better person. Protect yourself. Don't confuse friendship with immunity from harm. Favoring friends over merit breeds incompetence and resentment. Unqualified friends drain resources, frustrate top performers, and lower standards. You'll struggle to give honest feedback, undermining your authority. The best people will leave. Seeing loyalty rewarded over skill, comfort over excellence weakens your organization from within. The cost, a slow decay of performance or a sudden collapse from misplaced trust. Law 2 isn't about cynicism, it's about boundaries and context. In power, strategy must govern emotion. Trust is earned, not given for comfort. Michael's downfall and Sung's success show the stakes of confusing friendship with leadership. Be sovereign, assess competence and self-interest before granting trust. Keep personal and professional worlds separate to protect both. This wisdom preserves your ambitions and your relationships. The final enduring message of this law is one of vigilant awareness. It is a call to become a more astute observer of human nature, both in others and, crucially, in yourself. The world is not divided neatly into friends and enemies. It is a complex tapestry of individuals driven by a swirling mix of motivations: need, ambition, fear, gratitude, and envy. Your task is to look past the simple labels and see the underlying currents. A person's title as friend or enemy is far less important than their actions, their interests, and their character. Judge people by what they do, not by what they say or what they once were to you. History does not guarantee loyalty. This wisdom requires you to be constantly awake to the subtle shifts in the dynamics around you. Pay attention to the quiet signs of growing resentment in a friend, or the surprising reliability of a rival. Do not dismiss the small red flags, the passive-aggressive comment, the conveniently missed deadline, the faint praise. These are often the early tremors that signal a future earthquake. Conversely, the rival who competes with integrity, the critic who gives honest feedback, the competitor who operates with professionalism, these are individuals who may have the potential to be powerful allies under the right circumstances. Vigilance is not paranoia, it is the simple practice of seeing what is truly there, not what you wish was there. As you move forward, carry this knowledge not as a heavy shield that isolates you from the world, but as a finely tuned compass that helps you navigate its complexities. The enemy you fear today may, through a surprising turn of events and a strategic act of grace, become your strongest and most dedicated supporter tomorrow. Their loyalty, forged in the fire of renewed opportunity, can prove more resilient than steel. And the friend you love, the one you believe would never harm you, may, if they feel left behind, entitled, or overshadowed, become the unexpected threat you were never prepared to face. Their betrayal will sting the most because you willingly gave them the blade. Therefore, be aware. Be wise. Do not give your trust away cheaply or based on sentiment alone. Build your alliances on the solid ground of mutual respect, shared goals, and proven competence. In the intricate dance of power, the most dependable partners are not always the ones you are most comfortable with, but the ones whose success is inextricably linked to your own. Understand this, and you will not only protect yourself from the most painful of betrayals, but you will also unlock the potential for the most powerful and unexpected of allegiances. You will become the sovereign of your own destiny.